2011. Dallas, Texas. When Dr. Marcus Howard signed that autopsy report on March 23 at 11:47 p.m., he thought no one would ever question his findings. The death certificate listed cardiac arrest as the cause. But what the cameras captured in Operating Room 7 that night would haunt Parkland Hospital for years to come. This is the story of how one lie buried under institutional silence nearly destroyed a family's search for truth, and why the evidence Dr. Howard tried to hide still exists today. If stories like this matter to you, real investigations into medical cover-ups, hit that like button and subscribe. We dig deeper into cases like Dr. Howard's because transparency in healthcare affects all of us. Sarah Mitchell had never questioned a doctor before March 24, 2011. At 34, she worked as a paralegal, trained to spot inconsistencies in legal documents, but medicine felt like sacred territory. That changed when she read her father's death certificate for the third time, sitting in the fluorescent-lit hallway of Parkland Hospital's administrative wing. Cardiac arrest following routine gallbladder surgery. The words looked official, stamped with Dr. Marcus Howard's signature and the hospital seal. But something felt wrong. Her father, James Mitchell, 58, had been healthier than most men his age. No heart problems. His pre-operative clearance from just 6 days earlier showed normal EKG, normal stress test, normal everything. The cardiologist had even joked about her father's teenage heart during their consultation on March 17. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her cousin Linda, who worked night security at Parkland. "Can you meet me at the hospital? I have something to show you. Don't tell anyone you're coming." 23 minutes later, Sarah found Linda smoking behind the emergency department, her security uniform wrinkled from a 12-hour shift. "I shouldn't be doing this," Linda said, crushing her cigarette under her heel. "But I was working that night. March 23rd. I saw things." Linda pulled out her phone, hands shaking slightly. The security system automatically backs up to an external server. Standard procedure. But someone requested that the footage from or 7 be permanently deleted the next morning. That never happens. What kind of things did you see? Your father was awake when they wheeled him out of or 7. Sarah, he was awake. The death certificate says he died on the table at 10:15 p.m., but I saw him being moved to the recovery wing at 10:47 p.m. I checked my logs twice. Sarah felt her stomach drop. "That's impossible," Dr. Howard said. "Dr. Howard wasn't even in the hospital that night until 11:30 p.m., Linda interrupted. "I scanned his badge personally when he arrived. But somehow he signed off on a death that supposedly happened an hour earlier." Linda glanced around nervously before continuing. "There's more. I made copies of the security logs before they could alter them. Badge scans don't lie. Your father's surgeon, Dr. Patricia Chen, badged out at 9:23 p.m. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Williams, left at 9:31 p.m. The entire surgical team was gone before your father supposedly died. Then who was with him? That's what I need you to help me figure out. But we have to be careful. 3 days after your father's death, Dr. Chen requested an immediate transfer to Houston Methodist. She'd been at Parkland for 8 years, had tenure track, owned a house in Highland Park. Now she's gone. Sarah stared at the death certificate in her hands. The timing discrepancies weren't just suspicious, they were impossible. In Texas, a death certificate required the attending physician's personal examination of the deceased. Dr. Howard couldn't have examined her father at 10:15 p.m. if he didn't arrive until 11:30 p.m. Linda, I need those security logs. And I need to know exactly who had access to or 7 that night. Her cousin pulled a USB drive from her pocket. Everything's on here. Badge scans, security footage timestamps, even the maintenance logs. But Sarah, once you start looking into this, there's no going back. People have careers to protect. "My father is dead," Sarah said quietly. "His last words to me were, 'See you tomorrow, kiddo.' He was supposed to be home by the weekend." Linda nodded, understanding. "There's something else. The hospital's internal incident report system shows a Level 3 complication was filed 4 or 7 on March 23 at 10:52 p.m. But when I tried to access it the next day, it had been reclassified and moved to a restricted access folder." What's a Level 3 complication? Unexpected patient injury requiring immediate intervention. Could be anything from accidental organ damage to anesthesia overdose. The point is, someone filed a report after your father was supposed to be dead. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle forming in her mind, but the picture they created was horrifying. Who has access to reclassify incident reports? Department heads and above. In this case, that would be Dr. Howard. He's chief of pathology. The same Dr. Howard who signed the death certificate. The same Dr. Howard who somehow examined a patient an hour before he arrived at the hospital. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the implications settling between them. Sarah's legal training kicked in. She needed documentation, witnesses, a timeline that couldn't be disputed. "I want to see the operating room," she said finally. "Sarah, I can't." "You have access. It's been a day since they used it. If something happened in there, if there's any physical evidence." Linda checked her watch. 2:17 a.m. The hospital was in its quietest phase, skeleton crew only. 10 minutes. That's all. If we get caught, I lose my job and you get banned from the premises. Then we'll never find out what really happened. They entered through the surgical suite staff entrance, Linda's badge providing access to the sterile corridor. Or 7 sat at the end of the hallway, its doors closed but not locked. Standard protocol was to deep clean operating rooms within 18 hours of use, but Linda had delayed the cleaning crew, claiming a scheduling conflict. Inside or 7, Sarah immediately noticed something odd about the arrangement. The surgical table had been positioned differently from standard gallbladder surgery setup, angled toward the corner rather than centered under the surgical lights. Medical equipment that should have been returned to storage sat abandoned in the corner. An intubation kit, emergency defibrillator, and what appeared to be a crash cart with opened medication drawers. "Linda, look at this." Sarah pointed to dark stains on the floor near the corner positioning. "Is that blood? More than you'd expect from a routine gallbladder removal." Linda knelt down, examining the pattern. "It's not spatter from the surgical site. This looks like someone bled directly onto the floor. A lot." Sarah pulled out her phone and began taking pictures, documenting everything. The abandoned equipment, the unusual table position, the blood pattern. But it was what she found in the medical waste bin that made her hands shake. Surgical gauze. Massive quantities of it, far more than a routine procedure would require. And it was soaked with blood, not the controlled bleeding of surgery, but the desperate, heavy bleeding of someone fighting for their life. "My father didn't die of cardiac arrest during surgery," Sarah whispered, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. "Something went wrong. Badly wrong. And they covered it up." Linda was examining the crash cart. "Sarah, look at the medication logs. Someone administered epinephrine, atropine, and adenosine. That's not cardiac arrest medication. That's what you give someone whose heart is stopping from blood loss or surgical trauma." The final piece of evidence was hidden beneath a surgical drape on a side table, a blood-stained surgical report, different from the official one Sarah had received. This one, written in Dr. Chen's handwriting, told a different story entirely. Patient experienced massive hemorrhaging following accidental nicking of hepatic artery. Blood loss estimated 2.2 liters. Emergency measures initiated. Patient stabilized but required immediate transfusion. Condition critical but viable. Recommend ICU monitoring and surgical repair of arterial damage. The report was signed by Dr. Chen at 10:23 p.m. and countersigned by Dr. Williams at 10:31 p.m. At the bottom, in red ink, someone had written, "Patient expired 10:15 p.m. MH." But the timeline made no sense. How could her father have died at 10:15 p.m. if Dr. Chen was still trying to save his life at 10:23 p.m.? "Linda," Sarah said, her voice barely audible, "I think they killed my father. Not intentionally, but through negligence." And then Dr. Howard helped them cover it up. As they prepared to leave or 7, Linda noticed something that chilled them both: fresh scratches around the lock mechanism on the medical waste disposal unit. Someone had recently forced it open. "They've been back," Linda whispered. "Since yesterday. Someone's been destroying evidence." Sarah didn't sleep that night. By 6 a.m. on March 25th, she was sitting in her car outside the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, waiting for it to open. The evidence from or 7 was compelling, but she needed an expert opinion, someone who could interpret the medical inconsistencies professionally. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, assistant medical examiner, had handled controversial cases before. When Sarah explained the timeline discrepancies and showed her the photographs from or 7, Dr. Reyes's expression grew increasingly serious. "Ms. Mitchell, what you're describing suggests a significant deviation from standard care," Dr. Reyes said, studying the blood-stained surgical report. "This document indicates your father survived the initial complication. If that's accurate, the death certificate is not just wrong, it's falsified." "Can you examine my father's body?" "That's the problem. According to the hospital's records, your father was cremated yesterday morning, March 24th, less than 24 hours after death." Dr. Reyes frowned. "That's unusually fast. Standard procedure is to wait at least 48 hours unless there's a specific religious or cultural requirement." Sarah felt her stomach turn. "We never requested cremation. My father wanted to be buried next to my mother." Dr. Reyes immediately picked up her phone. "I'm calling the crematorium. If your father's body was disposed of without proper family consent, that's a serious legal violation." The conversation was brief but revealing. The cremation had been expedited by a medical necessity order signed by Dr. Howard, citing infectious disease concerns. But Sarah's father had no infectious diseases. His pre-operative blood work was clean. "Dr. Reyes, they destroyed the evidence." "Not all of it. The crematorium is required to retain tissue samples for 30 days after cremation. We can still perform a limited toxicology analysis and check for signs of surgical trauma." While Dr. Reyes initiated the tissue sample request, Sarah decided to investigate Dr. Howard's background. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Dr. Marcus Howard, 52, chief of pathology at Parkland Hospital since 2008, had a history of cleaning up surgical complications. Not officially, his personnel file was spotless. But cross-referencing medical malpractice databases with his tenure, Sarah found a pattern. In 2009, a 43-year-old woman died during routine appendix surgery. Official cause: cardiac arrest. The family never sued because the death certificate appeared straightforward. In 2010, a 67-year-old man died during hernia repair. Official cause: cardiac arrest. Again, no lawsuit, no investigation. Both cases involved Dr. Chen as the surgeon. Both death certificates were signed by Dr. Howard. Both families received their loved ones' ashes within 24 hours of death. Sarah's phone rang. "Linda, calling from the hospital." "I've been digging deeper into the security system," Linda said, her voice tense. "Someone accessed the server room last night. 3:17 a.m. Used a master key card." "Who has master access?" "Administration level. Hospital directors, department heads, IT supervisors. But here's the thing. I found backup footage on an off-site server that automatically mirrors everything. They can delete the local files, but they can't touch the external backup. What does it show? Your father walking into or 7 at 6:23 p.m. on March 23rd. Surgery scheduled to start at 7 p.m. Everything looks normal until... Linda paused. Sarah, you need to see this for yourself. Can you meet me tonight? That afternoon, Sarah received a call from her father's insurance company. They were requesting additional documentation before processing the life insurance claim. Specifically, they wanted to speak with Dr. Chen about the surgical procedure. Ma'am, we've been trying to reach Dr. Chen for 3 days, the insurance investigator explained. Houston Methodist says she never reported for her scheduled position. She seems to have disappeared. Sarah felt pieces clicking together. Dr. Chen performs the surgery. Something goes wrong. She flees to Houston but never shows up for work. Dr. Howard falsifies the death certificate to cover the medical error. The hospital destroys evidence to protect itself from litigation. But there was still something missing from the timeline. That evening, Linda met Sarah in the hospital parking lot with a laptop containing the backup security footage. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about March 23rd. The footage from or 7's exterior camera showed Sarah's father being wheeled in at 6:23 p.m., exactly as scheduled. Dr. Chen and her team entered at 6:45 p.m. Surgery began on schedule at 7 p.m. At 8:17 p.m., the first sign of trouble. Someone ran out of or 7 and returned with a crash cart. The urgency in their movement was unmistakable. At 8:34 p.m., Dr. Chen emerged from the operating room, visibly distraught, and made a phone call. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. At 8:47 p.m., 2 people in hospital scrubs Sarah didn't recognize entered or 7. Neither one badged in. They used someone else's access card. At 9:23 p.m., Dr. Chen left the hospital, just as Linda had recorded. But she wasn't alone. One of the unidentified figures left with her. At 10:12 p.m., the remaining unidentified person wheeled a covered gurney out of or 7. The footage clearly showed the outline of a body beneath the sheet. At 10:47 p.m., the same person wheeled what appeared to be another covered gurney back into or 7. At 11:30 p.m., Dr. Howard arrived at the hospital and went directly to or 7. At 11:52 p.m., Dr. Howard emerged carrying a briefcase and went to his office. At 12:23 a.m. on March 24th, Dr. Howard left the hospital. Linda, there were 2 gurneys, Sarah whispered, staring at the screen. Something was taken out at 10:12 p.m. and something else was brought back at 10:47 p.m. Your father was moved twice. First out, then back in. The question is, was he alive during the first move? Sarah studied the footage more carefully. Can you enhance this section? When they're wheeling him out at 10:12. Linda zoomed in on the gurney. As they watched, a corner of the sheet shifted, and for just a moment they could see movement underneath. He was alive, Sarah breathed. My father was alive when they moved him out of or 7. Then where did they take him? And what did they bring back? The implications were staggering. If James Mitchell had been alive at 10:12 p.m., and the death certificate claimed he died at 10:15 p.m., then what happened during those 35 minutes he was missing from or 7? Sarah's legal mind raced through the possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Had they moved her father to another location to let him die? Had they performed some procedure to cover up their mistake? Or had something even darker occurred? I need to find out who those 2 unidentified people were, Sarah said. And I need to know what was in that briefcase Dr. Howard was carrying. Linda nodded grimly. I have badge access logs for every entry into the hospital that night. We can cross-reference times and figure out whose cards were used to get those people into or 7. As they prepared to dive deeper into the investigation, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. Stop looking into your father's death. Some things are better left buried. This is your only warning. The message was sent at 11:43 p.m., exactly the time they were watching the security footage. Someone was watching them watch. Sarah didn't go home that night. The threatening text message meant someone knew about their investigation, and she wasn't taking any chances. Instead, she and Linda drove to a 24-hour diner in Deep Ellum, bringing the laptop and all their documentation with them. "We need to go to the police," Linda said, stirring her coffee nervously. "This is beyond what we can handle alone." "With what?" "Security footage that shows my father being moved around, but no proof of actual wrongdoing? A death certificate with timeline issues that could be explained as clerical errors." Sarah shook her head. "We need something concrete. Something undeniable." That's when Linda remembered something crucial. The badge logs. I never finished cross-referencing them. She opened the laptop and pulled up the access records. "Let me see who entered or 7 using borrowed credentials." The data was revealing. At 8:47 p.m., someone had used Dr. Janet Morse's badge to enter or 7. But Dr. Morse had badged out of the hospital at 4:30 p.m., and her car was recorded leaving the parking garage at 4:37 p.m. At 9:15 p.m., someone used Dr. Robert Kim's credentials. Dr. Kim had been in emergency surgery on the 3rd floor treating a car accident victim. His location was confirmed by multiple witnesses and surgical records. Someone stole their badges, Sarah realized, or cloned them. But hospital security badges have photos. How did they get past the camera checkpoints? Linda pulled up the hallway security footage. The 2 figures entering or 7 were wearing surgical masks and caps, completely obscuring their faces. But there was something familiar about their movements, their build. "Wait," Linda said, pausing the footage. "Look at this person's shoes." The figure on the right was wearing distinctive cowboy boots under their scrubs, an unusual choice for hospital wear. "I know someone who wears boots like that to work," Linda continued. "Dr. Margaret Osgood, head of hospital risk management. She's from West Texas, always talks about her ranch. Those are custom-made Lucchese boots, probably cost more than most people's monthly salary." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Risk management. The department responsible for minimizing the hospital's legal exposure when medical errors occurred. Linda, what if this wasn't just a cover-up of medical malpractice? What if it was something worse? They spent the next hour researching Dr. Osgood's background. What they found painted a disturbing picture. In her 12 years at Parkland, patient mortality rates in cases she reviewed dropped significantly. Not because care improved, but because causes of death were consistently reclassified in ways that protected the hospital from liability. At 3:30 a.m., Sarah's phone rang. Dr. Reyes from the medical examiner's office. "Ms. Mitchell, I have the tissue analysis results from your father's remains. You need to come in immediately. And bring whatever evidence you've collected." They arrived at the medical examiner's office as the sun was rising. Dr. Reyes looked like she hadn't slept either. "Sarah, your father didn't die of cardiac arrest," Dr. Reyes said without preamble. "The tissue analysis shows massive blood loss, consistent with arterial damage during surgery. But there's something else. He had dangerously high levels of potassium chloride in his system." "What does that mean?" Potassium chloride is used in hospitals for legitimate medical purposes, but in high concentrations it can cause cardiac arrest. It's also one of the drugs used in lethal injections. The room fell silent. Sarah felt the world tilting around her. "Are you saying someone intentionally killed my father?" "I'm saying the levels in his tissue are far higher than any legitimate medical use would require. Combined with the timeline discrepancies you've shown me, it suggests your father may have been given a lethal injection to cover up the surgical complications." Dr. Reyes continued, "There's more. I contacted the crematorium about the infectious disease justification Dr. Howard used to expedite cremation. No infectious disease requires immediate cremation. That was a fabrication. Sarah's hands were shaking. So they botched his surgery, then killed him to cover it up, then destroyed the evidence? That's what the physical evidence suggests. But we need to be very careful here. If we're right, we're talking about premeditated murder, not just malpractice. Dr. Reyes had already contacted the Dallas Police Department's Homicide Division. Detective Ray Castillo would be taking over the investigation, but he wanted to review all their evidence first. By noon, they were sitting in an interview room at police headquarters, laying out the entire case for Detective Castillo. The security footage, the badge access logs, the tissue analysis, the falsified death certificate, everything. Detective Castillo, a 15-year veteran of homicide investigations, listened carefully to every detail. "This is one of the most comprehensive civilian investigations I've ever seen," he admitted. "But we have a problem. Dr. Chen has disappeared, Dr. Howard has lawyered up, and Dr. Osgood is claiming the security footage is inconclusive. They know we're investigating? Word travels fast in hospitals, especially when there's potential criminal liability." Detective Castillo leaned forward. "But I have some news that might interest you. Dr. Chen didn't disappear. She's in protective custody." Sarah's heart leaped. "She's alive?" "Very much so. And she wants to talk. Apparently, she's been trying to come forward since your father's death, but someone threatened her family." Detective Castillo slid a recording device across the table. "She agreed to let you hear her statement." Dr. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper, but her words were clear. "James Mitchell should be alive today. The surgery went wrong. I nicked his hepatic artery, causing severe bleeding. But we got it under control. He was stable by 9:15 p.m. I recommended moving him to intensive care for monitoring, standard protocol for surgical complications." That's when Dr. Osgood and someone from administration showed up. They said the hospital couldn't afford another malpractice lawsuit, that we needed to manage the situation. They had already called Dr. Howard. I refused to participate. That's when they threatened my children. Said they knew where my kids went to school, where my husband worked. Said medical accidents happen to doctors' families too. They forced me to leave. When I got to my car, I could hear them moving Mr. Mitchell. I waited in the parking garage, hoping, but when I saw Dr. Howard arrive with that briefcase, I knew what they were going to do. I drove to Houston that night, but I couldn't take the job. Couldn't face working in another hospital knowing what I'd let happen. I've been staying with my sister, trying to figure out how to come forward without destroying my family." The recording ended. Sarah was crying, but they were tears of rage, not sadness. "Detective Castillo, what happens now?" "Now we arrest the people who murdered your father. Dr. Osgood is already in custody. We picked her up 2 hours ago. Dr. Howard will be next. The administrator Dr. Chen mentioned has been identified and will be arrested tonight." "What about Dr. Chen?" "She'll testify in exchange for immunity. Her cooperation is what's going to convict the others." As they prepared to leave the police station, Detective Castillo handed Sarah a folder. "Your father's real medical records. The ones they tried to destroy. Turns out Dr. Chen made copies of everything and hid them in a safety deposit box." Sarah opened the folder. Inside was her father's actual surgical report, showing that he had survived the initial complication and was expected to make a full recovery. At the bottom, in Dr. Chen's handwriting, "Patient vital signs stable. Prognosis excellent. Recommend 48-hour ICU observation as precautionary measure." Her father should have lived. He should have been home by the weekend, just like he promised. But institutional self-preservation had turned a medical error into cold-blooded murder. 6 months later, Sarah sat in a Dallas courtroom watching Dr. Margaret Osgood's murder trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, badge access logs, tissue analysis showing lethal injection, and Dr. Chen's detailed testimony about the cover-up conspiracy. The trial had revealed the full scope of what happened that night in March 2011. After Dr. Chen left the hospital, Dr. Osgood and hospital administrator Richard Vaughn had moved James Mitchell to a storage room in the basement. He was still alive, still stable, but they couldn't risk him surviving to potentially sue the hospital for the surgical complication. Dr. Howard arrived with a briefcase containing potassium chloride and the necessary injection equipment. The plan was simple: kill James Mitchell with an untraceable drug, return his body to or 7, and forge a death certificate claiming cardiac arrest during surgery. But they made crucial mistakes. First, they didn't account for the off-site security backup system that captured everything. Second, they moved too fast with the cremation, raising suspicions at the medical examiner's office. Third, they underestimated Dr. Chen's conscience and her willingness to eventually come forward. The prosecution had built an airtight case. Dr. Osgood faced first-degree murder charges. Dr. Howard was charged with murder and falsifying government documents. Administrator Vaughn pled guilty to conspiracy and agreed to testify against the others. During the trial, more victims emerged. The pattern Sarah had discovered, suspicious cardiac arrest deaths following routine surgeries, was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation uncovered at least 12 other cases over 5 years where patients had died under similar circumstances. Each case followed the same pattern: surgical complication, rapid cremation, falsified death certificate, and families who never questioned the official story because they trusted medical professionals. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor said during closing arguments, "this was not medical malpractice. This was not even criminal negligence. This was calculated murder, committed to protect institutional profits at the expense of human lives." The defense tried to argue that the defendants were simply trying to prevent frivolous lawsuits that could harm the hospital's ability to serve the community. But the evidence was too clear, the pattern too established. On October 15, 2012, Dr. Margaret Osgood was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Dr. Marcus Howard received the same sentence. Richard Vaughn, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder. But the legal victory felt hollow to Sarah. Her father was still gone, and no amount of justice could bring him back. The civil lawsuit that followed was settled for $15 million, the largest medical malpractice settlement in Dallas County history. But more importantly, it led to systematic changes in hospital oversight and patient safety protocols. Parkland Hospital implemented new policies requiring multiple physician sign-offs on death certificates, mandatory waiting periods before cremation, and independent review of all surgical complications. The changes were dubbed Mitchell's Law, in honor of Sarah's father. Dr. Patricia Chen completed her testimony and was granted immunity from prosecution. She left medicine entirely and now works as a patient advocate, helping families navigate medical bureaucracy and identify potential misconduct. The case also exposed broader problems in American healthcare. A Department of Health and Human Services investigation found that medical error cover-ups were more common than previously believed, with an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 preventable deaths annually being misclassified to avoid liability. Sarah used her legal background and the settlement money to establish the James Mitchell Foundation, a non-profit organization that investigates suspicious medical deaths and provides legal assistance to families seeking accountability from healthcare institutions. "The hardest part isn't the loss," Sarah told a medical ethics conference 2 years after the trial. "The hardest part is knowing that my father's death was completely preventable. Not just the surgical complication, that's a risk in any surgery, but the decision to murder him rather than accept responsibility for a mistake." The Foundation has since investigated over 200 cases of suspected medical misconduct, leading to 47 successful prosecutions and millions of dollars in settlements for victims' families. Linda left her security job at Parkland and now works as the foundation's head of investigations. Her experience with hospital security systems and knowledge of medical protocols proved invaluable in identifying patterns of institutional cover-ups. On March 23, 2013, exactly 2 years after her father's death, Sarah visited his grave for the first time since his funeral. She had finally been able to have his body exhumed and properly buried next to her mother, as he had wanted. "I kept my promise, Dad," she whispered, placing flowers on the headstone. "I found the truth, and I made sure it can't happen to anyone else's family." The headstone bore a simple inscription: James Mitchell, 1953 to 2011. Beloved Father. His death demanded justice, his memory demands change. As Sarah prepared to leave the cemetery, her phone rang. Another family, another suspicious death, another hospital claiming cardiac arrest in a routine procedure. The work continued. The Mitchell Foundation's success had made Sarah a target for healthcare institutions trying to suppress investigations, but it had also made her a hero to families seeking truth. Medical schools now teach courses on ethical decision-making using the Mitchell case as a primary example of how institutional self-interest can lead to horrific crimes. Dr. Osgood died in prison in 2018, still maintaining her innocence. Dr. Howard remains incarcerated, eligible for parole in 2037. Richard Vaughn was released in 2020 and works as a consultant helping hospitals implement transparency policies, a form of redemption that Sarah initially opposed but eventually supported. "Forgiveness isn't about them," Sarah explained to a journalist. "It's about ensuring that the system that enabled them to kill my father gets completely dismantled and rebuilt." The most important outcome wasn't the individual convictions, but the institutional changes that followed. Hospitals across the country now face much stricter oversight of patient deaths, mandatory reporting of surgical complications, and criminal penalties for administrators who participate in cover-ups. Sarah's father had entered Parkland Hospital on March 23, 2011, expecting routine surgery and a quick recovery. Instead, he became the victim of a healthcare system that valued profits over people, institutional reputation over human life. But his death also became the catalyst for reforms that have since saved thousands of lives and prevented countless families from experiencing the anguish of losing a loved one to medical greed disguised as professional discretion. The evidence that Dr. Howard tried to bury had indeed been buried, with James Mitchell. But truth has a way of surfacing, especially when people like Sarah refuse to accept convenient lies. In the end, the cover-up failed not because it was poorly executed, but because it was fundamentally wrong. And in America's healthcare system, there are still people willing to fight for what's right, no matter how powerful the institutions they're fighting against. The Mitchell case remains a landmark in medical ethics and criminal justice, proving that even the most sophisticated institutional cover-ups can be defeated by determined individuals armed with evidence, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Today, the James Mitchell Foundation operates in 23 states and has prevented an estimated 12,000 preventable medical deaths through its investigations and advocacy work. Sarah Mitchell continues to fight for healthcare transparency, but she often reflects on the simple truth that started it all. Her father went to the hospital to get better, and they killed him to protect themselves. It shouldn't have taken a legal battle, criminal prosecution, and national media attention to achieve what should be basic medical ethics: telling the truth about what happens to patients under your care. The Mitchell case proved that institutional medicine can be just as corrupt as any other industry when profit supersedes patient welfare. But it also proved that families willing to fight for truth can defeat even the most sophisticated cover-ups. Every time Sarah speaks at a medical conference or helps another family investigate a suspicious death, she honors her father's memory by ensuring that his death had meaning beyond the tragedy of loss. The evidence that Dr. Howard tried to bury didn't stay buried. And neither did the truth about what happened in or 7 on that March night in 2011. Sometimes justice is delayed, but when it comes completely. What do you think about the Mitchell case? Have you or your family ever experienced questionable medical care that raised red flags? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes discussing these cases helps other families recognize warning signs. If this investigation into medical cover-ups resonated with you, subscribe to Ward 13 for more deep dives into healthcare cases that demand transparency. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the stories hospitals don't want you to know.